Welcome everyone, members of the public in the chamber and those watching online as well. Councillors here, and I'm not sure whether Councillor Cowles might be joining online. Apologies for this session from Councillor Hopkins and Councillor Ryan will be late, I believe, but will be here. Is that everyone? I think that's all. So we'll get underway. We haven't got a written agenda as such, but I'm sure officers are going to show us the path as we go through this. So happy to hand over to Director Roger Cook.
Thank you, Mick Kircher. Yes, welcome to the final workshop we have on the Water Services Delivery Plan. Our Chief Executive has been delayed in another meeting, will be joining us as soon as he possibly can. We have the team here to answer questions and to run through any points of clarification that you may have. But we also, the agenda for today is a update from Morrison Lowe, our contractor, on where we've got to with the plan. And Stu's online now. Welcome, Stu. And we also have Bancorp doing a short presentation on credit rating and what a credit rating means for the organisation, what we'd have to go through, the costs, etc., and the time frame to get that. So I believe we're going to go to Stu first, and pass back to the Mayor to introduce Stu from Morrison Lowe.
Thanks very much, Mr. Cook. I don't believe we probably need to introduce Stu. Stu has joined us many times, so welcome along to you, Stu. And are you happy just to hand straight to you now?
Yeah, that's fine. Good afternoon, everyone. I have a brief presentation to take us through, which I'll just try and share. I'm always terrible at sharing presentations on my computer. It always takes me much longer than it should. We'll get to the actual right slide first, not that's nice and big. All good on your end?
Yep,
cool. Okay. So I've got a brief presentation to take us through. Effectively what this is that following the DIA feedback, we've gone through, worked with your team to try and make sure that we're comfortable about what capital investment needs to be added back into your water service delivery plan to give DIA confidence around that the compliance issues are being met.
Stu, your volume's just dropped off a little bit.
Oh, interesting.
It's we can hear you, but it's just you've gone a bit faint.
Right. Okay. Pull the headset off. Is that any better?
That's good.
Cool. Okay, it might just be without the headset. It might just be a little bit echoey, but we'll see how we go. So now I've lost my train of thought. So what I'm going to present to you is basically the outcomes of us talking to your team, looking at what the capital investment could be to respond to DIA's queries. I think as we discussed in the workshop last week, a number of the issues that were raised by DIA could be resolved through addition to the narrative in the Water Services Delivery Plan. So we've worked through that, and we're still building out some of that narrative, but that's all being worked on at the moment, with the key kind of objective there, I guess, being anywhere where we have identified a compliance issue, we're making sure that we also are explicit about what the investment response is there. Where there isn't a clear investment response, that's where I guess this work comes in and has tried to reflect what those different investment responses need to be. Having taken on board also the information that Josh would have provided to you, I think it was in the workshop 2 weeks ago now, where Josh presented to us around acceptable solutions and the NTUs of some of the drinking water suppliers in particular. So what I'll take you through is just a bunch of charts and numbers. A lot of these actually don't look that different to each other, partly because of the scale of the chart, and partly because we're actually only dealing with the difference of about 10 million of CapEx between the different scenarios. So Each of these scenarios don't necessarily have a huge uplift in here, but I do want to show what the impact of those different scenarios are, and then ultimately, I guess what we need is some feedback about what scenario we are reflecting in the water services delivery plan. And obviously here you'll see that we've put forward a scenario that we've recommended as well. So we've got 3 different investment scenarios that have been presented. The first is that base case, so that's what was in the draft water services delivery plan. I've got that there as a point of comparison, but not necessarily as a recommendation that that we should move forward with that, because it does exclude some costs that relate to compliance upgrades, meaning that we wouldn't be able to meet that investment sufficiency test most likely through DIA's review. The second is a recommended level of investment, so that's where we've uplifted the investment a little bit to capture all the compliance costs that we are aware of that would be necessary to be able to meet that investment sufficiency test. And finally, we've shown an increased one that that is closer to lining up with best practice, includes a bit more additional growth costs, and includes some what we call, I guess, nice to haves or should haves within the program. And we're reflecting that one just to show what that could look like. Of course, if councillors are interested in supporting that scenario, we have got the modelling behind that to be able to populate the WSDP on that scenario if we need to. So I'll take you through those in order, and then some of the charts I'll present to you will have all 3 of those scenarios layered on top. Effectively, the only reason and the main reason for that is that some charts it just makes more sense to have 3 lines on it, and some it doesn't. So just taking you through the base case scenario, this is what effectively will be reflected in a base case water services delivery plan if we do not change the investment program at all. So you can see with that yellow line there, that's the Three Waters debt to revenue compared to a debt to revenue limit that we've reflected in here for water services at 500%. It's worth noting, I guess, there that there is no internal limit for Three Waters debt to Three Waters revenue, but 500% is the number that DIA keep looking to with in-house business units as well as CCOs. So what we're showing here is compliance with that out through to 2034. Beyond that period, we would be breaching that 500%. And you can see the crimson or orange colour there on your screen being the available borrowing headroom against that 500% limit for Three Waters. And by 33-34, we've effectively got no real borrowing headroom for any additional capital expenditure in the Three Waters space if we're sticking to that if we're measuring against that 500% debt to revenue limit. Just to show what that looks like at a total council level. So this is all of council, and you can see I've got two black lines going across there. One is at your current 175% debt to revenue limit, and then the solid line at the top being the 280% limit that would apply if you secure a credit rating. And obviously you'll hear a bit about that later. That headroom has been measured against that 280% because we've assumed that you will seek a credit rating at some point. And as you can see, come 2033, we exceed the 175. So we would need a credit rating to be able to continue to invest in anything beyond that year based on our projections at the moment. And we can see there's a period of years there from about 2036 through to, I don't know, about 2042, 2041, where we've got a reasonably big constraint on our borrowing headroom there. And to be able to achieve that, you can see the yellow line is flat at 250%. We've constrained the debt to revenue at 250%. So we've modelled in a whole pile of additional revenue to be able to achieve that headroom over those years. So so while we've got a 10-year focus, I do want to just show as we move through what the impact of that longer term view is on charges, because we do end up with a bit of a spike in charges again come 2036 to be able to address that borrowing shortfall that we otherwise would face. That's all the debt information I'll present, the price information together, because it's easier to present that in terms of how the different scenarios play out together when we move through. But to move on to the recommended scenario, and mainly to focus here on what the changes are that we've made. There are some really so some of these changes are pretty key. So we've increased the budget for the Lower Waitaki capacity upgrade, and that's to accommodate connection to accommodate connection of the water supply source to Oamaru, and to help reduce the nitrates in that area. We don't believe that acceptable solutions will be able to get us to that point. We also have some additional costs here for the Otamatata drinking water supply upgrade per the information that Josh has presented, and an additional $4 million for universal water metering. Again, updated per Josh's latest costings. We previously had 8 million in the budget. We really need about, I've upped that to 12 million, and that is still on the lower end of that range in terms of what the costs were that Josh was presenting for water metering. The other ones here as well, all around drinking water supply upgrades and Josh's latest information in particular. So we've got upgrades in Awamoko, Tokarahi, Koru, and then also some additional increases here in relation to the Oamaru wastewater treatment plant upgrade and the Oamaru wastewater relocation renewal for Orwell Street. So we've added in some preliminary costs, and then we've just changed the timing on some of that cost there to allow for some early work around land purchasing, design, consents, etc. So in total, there's $9.8 million worth of changes in the version that I'm presenting now. That's across the capital program, across both water and wastewater, but also spread over that 10-year period. So we don't see here, like I say, the charts don't look terribly different. So we don't see a significant change in what the borrowing headroom and the debt to revenue looks like. Again, to be able to achieve that, I've obviously increased revenue, and we'll talk about that when we show the different scenarios against each other as we move forward. And I'm not going to dwell on these because they do look very, very similar to the charts that you were looking at earlier, and I imagine that these will be available to you to look at else, separately from this presentation anyhow. Similarly, for the total council debt to revenue, we have that same revenue restriction over that 2036 through 2041 year, where we've constrained our total council debt to revenue at 250%, but to be able to do that, we have had to model an additional revenue at a council level to ensure that we can meet those compliance requirements and those requirements of our lender. We've assumed that you would be uncomfortable moving from 250 up to 280 there, but even if you were comfortable going above, right up to the 280, all that would do is maybe spread out the number of years that you would have. It would just defer that revenue uplift to a later year. It's not going to avoid it entirely. Just to touch on what we've described as that increased investment scenario as well. So again, you probably won't see many changes between the charts at the total debt to revenue level. But if we just look at the additional changes that we think would be ideal to make to the program, but we are not recommending necessarily have to be made, that is an increase in the budget around the wastewater mains renewal budget to restore it to an earlier version of that wastewater mains renewal budget, an increase of 900,000 spread over 10 years. We've got 2 lines of additional operating cost coming in here. So when we talk about $9.4 million of additional costs, some of these operating costs are recurring. So while I've summed it up vertically, there's actually a little bit more cost built in because of that additional operating cost. So we have additional wastewater monitoring costs, which is effectively a spend to save initiative that will improve design outcomes and effectiveness of solutions. So we spend some money on doing more work up front and hope that means that we can deliver solutions that are more fit for purpose and potentially lower cost or at a different timing. We've also factored in some additional allowance for condition assessments to increase the understanding of useful lives of cast iron pipes, and particularly potentially allowing for an extension to the investment on that one as well. So we may not have to invest as much so early if we have better information about how long those pipes are lasting. certainly indicatively at the moment, we think cast iron pipes have the potential for their useful lives to be extended based on the performance data that we do have. We also have some district-wide water resilience reservoirs, so that's to address existing water network resilience issues, and in anticipation of what we think Taumata ROI is going to require moving forward in terms of resilience of the network and resilience of supply. So there's a $5 million allowance in this capital budget for that. And then finally, we've got some allowance here for network extension. So that's to support growth in some of the areas that are in the district plan, in areas that are not necessarily currently connected to water or wastewater networks, but are on the fringe of urban areas, which otherwise would have connections to that reticulation network. So that's the summary of the changes. Again, if I just take you through these charts, we're not seeing much of a difference in the story, but obviously the revenue again is a little bit higher to be able to make sure that we are meeting these thresholds. So like I say, we have modeled to ensure that we are below 500% in 2033-34. But again, we've got very little headroom in terms of a debt to revenue ratio for Three Waters activities under this scenario. And you can see that the debt headroom on this one at a total council debt to revenue level was actually a little bit lower over those years from 36 right through to 41, 42. And again, like I say, the same story again, we've constrained total council debt to revenue here at 250%. To be able to achieve that, we've obviously had to increase revenue. I'm going to take a big breath because I'm trying to whip through all this so that we can actually spend more time on questions. But the next bits are probably the key differences that you're probably more interested in terms of the different scenarios. These are where we're comparing revenue and debt between the scenarios, which probably makes it a little bit easier for you to understand what's going on here. The previous stuff was effectively to demonstrate that there is some around the compliance with the covenants. So the first thing I want to show here is the 30-year projection of household charges. I've done it over 30 years because, like I said, when we get to that 36, 37 period, we did require a significant spike in charges to be able to stay compliant with council's total debt to revenue requirements. You can see there that we're going from about 3,600, 3,700 to almost $5,000 per household in the period of a year or two. I haven't applied any smoothing to that uplift. We probably could smooth that a little bit further. But obviously, and I'll show you the impact of smoothing on our recommended scenario as we progress through the slides later on. But I guess the key thing here being, as I've mentioned, I think last week, is that the area under the curve is always the area under the curve. So if we apply smoothing, we still need to get to that same point at some point. It's just how quickly we get there. You can also see the difference between I won't dwell on the 30-year projections any longer because I've got a 10-year snapshot, which probably just shows the differences a little bit better because we've got a bit more of a condensed scale. And we can just see the differences between those scenarios coming through here. So you'll see that we've got the LTP scenario or the base case scenario being that dark, the plum kind of colored line at the bottom there. And then our two uplifted investment scenarios coming through above that. They look like they're largely on top of each other for a number of years. And then we get to 2034 where they start to split out a little bit in terms of, and that's really where we need to start modelling in that additional revenue to deal with that increased debt capacity. I'd say in that 2032 year where we've got the dip in the LTP number, that dip was also present in the recommended and increased investment scenarios, but I've just modelled it out to smooth it out because I don't think that council would likely decrease its charges only to increase them again the following year. I haven't applied that to the LTP base case because that's effectively reflective of what we originally had put forward in the WSDP. So that's the only reason I haven't applied it to there, but we would expect that dark line would actually be up nearer the red and yellow lines in 2031-32, but obviously sitting just a little bit below that. When we look at what this does for debt, as you would expect, we take on a little bit more debt because we're spending a little bit more money, and you can see the difference in these lines here. We actually have close to the same amount of debt under the base case scenario as we do under the recommended scenario in 2033-34, and that's because the recommended scenario has been collecting a little bit more revenue for a little bit longer over that time period. But our debt is getting pretty high, and certainly under that increased investment scenario, it exceeds 200 million by 2034. Just to show what this looks like in terms of average rates rises. So I know that was something that was brought up before. I have not modeled any changes to your rates take outside of Three Waters in here. So this just includes your LTP rates rises adjusted to reflect what would happen with the Three Waters rates rise here. So without any smoothing, we have rates rises of just a touch above 25% under all of those scenarios in 26-27. That's an increase into terms of your total rates revenue for across council. I haven't tried to translate that into an individual house, but if your total rates requirement has gone up by 25%, you would expect that most people's rates bills will go up by that much in that year. That will be followed by another rates rise of around 12% in 27-28, and then kind of normalizing out to around that sort of 5% or under number for most of the years for the rest of that 10-year period that we've got in here. And I've just pulled this out a little bit further than 10 years so that you can see where I was talking about that spike coming in 2036, 37. It's not quite as horrific as the one we've got in 26, 27, but we're obviously starting from a higher base as well. That spike kind of looking at about 15% for most of the scenarios there in a future year. And again, of course, we could smooth that out by having smaller rates rises for the years ahead of that, or spreading those rates rises out over a few years beyond that period as well. And you can just see that little dip in 2031, 32 that I've modeled out for the other two scenarios. And you can see, we've just got a couple of years where we've got no rates rise based on the LTP numbers and the water work that we've modeled out there.
Excuse me, Stu, have you got time for a question at the moment?
I can take a question now if you'd like. Yep.
John?
You got Stu, just a quick question. Is that based, those rating increases, that water only, or is that across the whole rate system?
No, that's across the whole rate system. So that's the water only component is closer to 60%. So I've reduced that. I've modeled that out in terms of what the total impact on a ratepayer would be instead here. We've talked about that 61% number, I think, in previous workshops.
Thank you.
Tim?
Just a quick question, Stu. You mentioned under the three scenarios, the highest, what do we call it, increased investment scenario. We talk about the additional operational spend on condition assessment and work around stretching the life of the asset or whatever. But what the numbers modelled in any of these scenarios wouldn't anticipate any potential gains to be made in that space. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So at the moment, we haven't presupposed what the outcome of that would be. I think it's worth noting, if you recall, I think it was Paul Hayes or Josh presenting your water renewals backlog in particular. So the condition assessment work that I was referring to there particularly relates to water mains. We have a really significant water main backlog. That's the asset class that we have the biggest renewals backlog at the moment. And it will take us through to about, if I recall correctly, 2037, 2038 to get on top of that backlog under current projections. So while that condition assessment may be able to move some of that around, what we would anticipate is that it's probably reprioritized rather than not spent in those years. But certainly that, we haven't anticipated what the impact of that would be at this point.
Thank you. And then just one other quick question based on what we've seen today, just around the overall debt position further out in time. What would happen if we brought some, I think it was it 2034 or 2037, there was that spike in charging. If we brought that forward a little bit, what would that do to the overall cost of water in the longer term?
Yeah, I think if you brought the rates rises forward, which obviously, if you look at this, there's probably some capacity to do some of that. Certainly in 32, 33, there's capacity to bring some of your rates up a little bit to a more moderate number. I can probably only talk kind of theoretically to that because I haven't modeled it, but that would obviously reduce your overall borrowings, which would reduce your interest charges, and ultimately would probably result in a slightly lower household cost. I can kind of show you the counter to that, which is, I guess, taking note from DIA's feedback on the draft water services delivery plan, and that's where I'm going to move to here about this impact of revenue smoothing, where we've deferred that 61% spike and spread it over a number of years. You can see that what that does is by 2034, the actual household charge is a little bit higher than it otherwise would have been. I think if you're saying, well, we're bringing forward some of those rates rises to deal with that 36, 37 spike, then it would sort of have a similar impact.
Thank you. Just check with Josh and Paul. Have you got anything to add at the moment around some of those, the project side of things? No? No. Josh?
I think if we,
Josh has got a question.
Hey, Stu. My apologies. This is the first time I'm seeing that graph. Over the past few weeks, we've talked about some very, very different numbers. Just wondering if you can explain to us why we're seeing quite different numbers coming out now than what we were previously.
Yeah, so most of the numbers, I think, in terms of Three Waters on their own, are the same at this point. This average rates rises graph here I'm showing you is trying to take that 61% increase that we had in 26, 27 and see what it would look like at a total council rates rise level. So we hadn't ever presented that one before, where we'd actually combined council's other rates revenue and other rates requirements with the waters one. That's why this looks like a sort of 25%. That's because I guess water revenue is only a portion of council's total revenue. So a 61% increase in water charges doesn't translate straight into a 61% increase in rates rises. So that's why we were down to that 25%. If that makes sense.
I thought the first 2 years where we had big increases did include all the LTP, plus the reintroduction of depreciation and other costs for projects during those years.
No, so so previously we've only talked about the increases to water charges. So those water charges were your water charges are, even in this behind here, are still going up 61% in that first year. But we hadn't ever shown what that impact is on the total rates bill prior to this.
Sorry, Stu, which year do you have depreciation coming back on at the moment?
That's fully funding in this particular case before we have the smoothing in the 26-27 year.
Because that was, try to remember the numbers now. That was something like 15% just on its own against the total rate.
Yeah. So sorry, Stu, we're just looking at the numbers, and I think a few people in the room here are a little bit flummoxed. So depreciation was about $7 million or thereabouts from memory, and total operating income was about $50 million. So a percent was roughly $500K. $7 million, we'd be anticipating a 14% rise in the first year. Just the numbers that we're seeing there are a bit different. Are you confident in the numbers, or are we?
No, I'm pretty confident in the numbers. I'm just I have depreciation for Three Waters in 26, 27 being somewhat higher than that, I believe, but I would have to get the appropriate spreadsheet open to be able to dive into exactly what that depreciation number is. I think I had it closer to 12 million. or
I
3
guess-
waters depreciation?
Because you've got 25, 26, which obviously is, the year we're in.
Yep.
That was 9.5%, basically 9.44%.
Mm. Yeah, and we've got that at probably about 8 on here. If I have a look at again, I'd have to pull open all the working papers on that one. Which, for whatever reason, it does not want me to scroll across to, just to make this a little bit harder.
I'm just going to hand over to Amanda, just if, our CFO, just to see what her comments are.
Yeah, I just wanted to step back. If we go back to the first waters workshop, we looked at the long-term plan numbers and then we added the waters in-house business as usual numbers back in. And then we were looking at the slides from the first workshop. 26, 27 was 9.44%. We can't really 25, 26 this current year, 9.44%. So it should still be similar to that. We can't really change this year that we're in now. 27 was 7%. 28 was that 25% increase, a big increase there to be able to stay within our debt headroom. After that meeting, we talked about funding Three Waters depreciation again. So we brought it back the following week, and that's where it was looking close, like in between 30-40% rates rise in that 28 financial year. And then since then, we've talked, Josh and Paul, obviously those previous slides about adding more necessary investment in, and from the feedback from DIA last week, obviously we needed to increase our investment. So you've taken those figures, so that 25% that was looking to happen in the 28 financial year, we've moved it, so it's happening earlier now in 27.
Yeah, that's
Just kind of questioning if that captures everything there. So it definitely captures all council-wide rates. It includes funding, waters depreciation. So I think it's around 9 mil.
Yeah, it is. It's around 9 mil. You're right. I've just managed to pull that open, so I
And
don't
then
know.
the extra investment as well. So this is a scenario, your middle scenario, is that with the increase?
Yeah, that does have the extra investment coming in. I think some of those additional costs are not coming in until 27, 28. Let me just double check that one as well.
So the change really from my graphs a couple of workshops ago to now, it's bumped that big increase forward from the 28 financial year to the 27 financial year. I guess Josh and I are kind of looking at it thinking potentially should have been higher if we're now, since last week, we're adding waters depreciation in that earlier year in 27. And investment proposing, just quite unsure how we can still have these sort of rates rises.
Yeah, well, look, I think so I've taken the total council revenue or rates requirement from the LTP work files that I've been provided, and just looked at the non-Three Waters component of that, and then I've added in effectively the revenue requirement that we've always been looking at as being required for Three Waters on top of that to get to this number. And I've only looked at the comparison across the total. So, but maybe this is something we need to talk through with a spreadsheet. You and I can take you through it, and we'll see if there's something different or wrong in there around the rates rises component particularly. So, but certainly so even in that 61% we had last time happening in 26, 27, that's because we had the full funding in the 26, 27 year. In the modelling that we had in that WSDP as well. So that timing hasn't been shifted between the last stuff that we did and this particular thing here.
Yeah, I think if we can carry on with what we can, I guess, be sure of at the moment, and obviously a conversation for you and Amanda to have afterwards.
Yeah, I suspect some of that
just to make sure. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts to this, and there's a lot of complexity behind the numbers that you've got there, Stu. that we don't see. So it's probably
Yep.
not an easy thing to try and address right now within the workshop, but yeah, if you can have that.
I think it's good to emphasize. I think we've all got the same parts in there.
Yeah.
And it's like, you take those 2 years, 26, 27, it's 40% rates rise if you add both together. And it's just the way it's split differently. You've smoothed it differently to
Yeah, that could well be. That
previously.
could well be the biggest difference there. Yeah. Well, I can't see it in here, but you're right. Between that 25% and the almost 15%, we're getting up to about 40 over 2 years. So.
Okay. Can we box on? Yep.
Okay. Boxing on with that big caveat in front that the rates rise numbers there might not be quite reflective of what we think they should look like. So we'll come back and have a look at those before we get any sign off on the draft water service delivery plan. We'll make sure we confirm what those actually look like. If we look at the impact of revenue smoothing on here, again, I've just shown that 30-year projection of household charges. I'm only comparing one scenario here, which is that recommended investment scenario. But you could, the impacts of this would be, albeit while the numbers might not be exactly the same, the trend would be very similar regardless of which investment scenario you use. I didn't really want to put more than 2 or 3 lines on any graph because it starts to get difficult to read. So you can see here the yellow line being that recommended investment scenario does have that significant uplift in rates requirements, as we talked about, the 61% between 25, 26 and 26, 27, and then another significant uplift in 27, 28. What we've tried to do is smooth the impact of that out over a number of years. So you have a number of gradual price rises over a number of years. But what you obviously see here is that we still reach effectively the same price around 2031. In fact, if we smooth it, our price is a little bit higher, and that's mainly reflective of the fact that we're holding a bit more debt because we haven't been collecting revenue, that higher level of revenue for quite as long. So prices by 2034 are slightly higher under that smooth scenario. And you can see again where we've again tried to smooth a little bit of that price increase out under the recommended scenario. Compared to the recommended scenario out for those latter years as well, actually. So we end up with a slightly higher price spike there, or these price rises, yeah, and then over time we get to roughly the same price, but that obviously takes a number of years to get there.
So Stu, just to qualify this one, it's water only. It's based on a residential property getting water, wastewater, and some form of stormwater. It doesn't apply to rural schemes, and it doesn't apply to commercial properties, but it's proportionate to those in some way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a combined investment profile. I think if you're looking at different sector groups, so whether that's commercial properties or whether that's rural versus urban communities, I think you can take the general direction as being largely consistent with the other ones, but obviously the actual price would be different. Similarly, this is based on your current charging structure, your current tariff structure. It's not based on any shift to volumetric pricing, which would probably only occur by the time the investment in the meters is complete. A shift to volumetric pricing is probably only going to occur in the latter part of that 10-year period, the 10-year window that we're looking through out to 2034. You'd normally expect you have a year or two of kind of bedding in practices, giving customers kind of what you call like a soft invoice or something, so they know what their charges would be under a volumetric price without actually charging them that for a few years, so they can get used to changing their habits. And sometimes you can get some big behavior shifts just from that.
And this is a form of harmonise. Like it's obviously,
yes,
and we bring harmonisation in. There will be differences to those numbers depending on what scheme people are on under the current system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, just one last question. And is inflation reflected in those numbers?
yes, this includes inflation and GST. So this is what the household would pay if it's a household. It's the money that actually comes out of their bank account on whatever year that they're experiencing that payment. So yeah, so that these numbers, yeah, inflated and include GST. We could present them uninflated if people would prefer to see that. I find that for the general public, just talking in inflated numbers seems to usually make a little bit more sense for people to understand that, you know, and to be able to reconcile that with what they're actually seeing in real life.
Yeah, I guess it comes, sorry to keep interrupting, but it comes back to people's incomes and how much do they increase over that time. So that they don't see that graph and think it's today's dollars terms that that actually in most cases the incomes will increase over that time
Yeah.
to a degree, but not that degree, obviously.
Yeah, so I mean, I can talk to that one a little bit more as well. But obviously, in the draft WSDP that we had, we did look at what historic income growth has been compared to the price indexes that we've used within this modelling, and obviously you see that while we do model income growth in that WSDP in terms of median household income, we do see these prices increasing faster than that because the average median or the average household charge under our modelling increases from around 1.7% of median household income up to about 3.4 or 3.5, I think, by memory. So you can see that there is an increasing affordability challenge where prices are going up faster than incomes. And we can talk a little bit. I can talk a little bit about how that impacts different sectors and communities within Waitaki as well. I haven't done the affordability metric, but I can certainly talk briefly about what data stats has around those different income buckets and some of the household composition that you have there and what that might look like for affordability as well. So yeah, and as you say, Gary, we do have in this particular situation, it is sort of a form of harmonisation. We don't have the data to be able to separate out what a rural scheme would be paying separately from the urban schemes, and to get to that level of granularity would probably take a fair bit of modelling for something that doesn't end up in the WSDP. So.
Yeah, no, it's just to be clear so that people reading it know their own situation. John.
Yeah, just another question, Stu. So the projection, that's all on costs out. Is there any recognition being given to better streamlined systems that actually supply or take away the wastewater and supply drinking water? So what I'm saying, is there a trade-off between more efficient systems as opposed to a straight out cost in those numbers?
We haven't tried to make any trade-offs around or assumed areas where there might be some efficiency through different types of investment and how that might achieve reduced operating cost over the long run. So I think the answer to that's probably no at this point. It's certainly not something we've tried to explore there. I suspect you probably end up, like you say, with a trade-off of significantly higher upfront capital to be able to, for example, recycle water, but yeah, potentially long term, maybe lower operating costs. But yeah, we certainly haven't tried to model that in.
Thank you.
This is just zooming in a little bit again, so just showing that difference again in terms of what the household price difference might look like under a smooth scenario versus that recommended option. So the recommended option, we have higher charges for about 3 years or 4 years really. If we smooth it, obviously we don't get quite to those same lofty heights over those years, but we do get to a higher point later on. And we do end up with still some pretty lofty increases in price over these years. So these are kind of about 15%, year on year increases to water charges over those years. So nothing to be scoffed at, I guess, over that period. And ultimately, whether you smooth it or not, you know, yes, there is a difference in price over the 10-year period, and it's certainly at the end of the 10 years. But ultimately, whether you smooth it or not is going to come down to, I guess, your appetite to be going out to the community regularly with slightly smaller charges, or to go out to the community, you know, once or twice with some much larger increases, and that's something I can't make that call for you, unfortunately. And you can see the difference, the impact that has on debt as well. So under that smooth scenario, which is the top line in this one, so we retain the same colors, debt is actually quite a bit higher in order to be able to ensure that we end up with a similar kind of price outcome. And out in 2034, that's, you know, a difference of about $15 million. Just showing what the difference in average rates rises, and again, I guess there's the big caveat or caution on this, but this is what I understand to be the smoothed scenario on and the impacts on the rates rises versus if we went straight down that recommended approach. So with the smoothed scenario, we still end up with a pretty big spike in 26, 27, so that's sitting at around 17-18%. But then we end up with some sustained higher rises for a number of years following that. Now, remember, these are on total rates rather than on just water charges here. So yeah, we end up with a slightly different picture, but with, again, ultimately effectively the same increase being required across all of those scenarios at the end of the day. And then just to show, this isn't, I mean, probably terribly interesting for the community, but when we are presenting that water services delivery plan, we do have to show what our operating surplus and operating deficit looks like. It is one of the parts of the revenue and financing and funding sufficiency tests. And you can see that under that, I've inadvertently changed my colors here. Sorry about that. But under the smooth scenario here, we maintain operating deficits for a significantly longer period of time, which obviously makes sense because we're deferring that, effectively how long it takes us to be able to fully recover all the money that we need to be able to break even and fully fund depreciation, which is what that main spread is. So we would obviously need to explain this to DIA and explain why that smoothing scenario, why we have adopted that smoothing scenario, and why we are comfortable that smoothing scenario is still financially sustainable. As I mentioned to you, we can support that with long-term modelling and indicate that, you know, over the long period of time we are managing our debt still. This is effectively a short-term decision to be able to get there, but it is worth just, you know, looking at what that impact is, and it does require, I guess, a level of additional explanation in the water services delivery plan. On the other hand, DIA obviously already indicated that it was DIA had already indicated that it had some concerns about that 61% rates rise. So, you know, I guess it's also there are two different ways. One, we have to explain a 61% rates rise or water charge rise, sorry, and the other one we have to explain a deficit. So either of them require us to explain something here. That's just what we explain. And that's all I had in that slide deck at the moment in terms of presenting graphs and information. So I'll stop my share, and then I'm happy to take questions on that. And I will do my best to answer them. If they're technical, I might have to get into the model. It might be a bit difficult to answer them on the spot, but we'll see how we go.
Thanks, Stu. We've got Tim.
Thanks, Stu. With regards to that last graph that you showed us, in the draft water service delivery plan, there was a table with the FFO, you know, percentage running across time. And I think I recall it running, you know, somewhere around 7 or 8% from memory. Correct me if I'm wrong, but so why are those graphs showing, you know, basically no to limited surplus?
So the FFO is effectively your cash um surplus. So it's not your operating surplus, which is what I was showing before, but it's just the surplus from the cash surplus from operations. So even with those operating surpluses, in most of those years we would still have a cash surplus. So our cash, the revenue coming in is meeting our cash costs. What I was showing you before also included the depreciation expense and interest costs, which are excluded from that FFO calculation.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you. And I guess just to, offer feedback on, on your reflections of the smooth versus recommended. I think for me, if we adopt the principles that you established around, if you make a decision one way or the other, it changes the outcome in the long term. My personal perspective is to avoid the smoothing approach for the benefit in the longer term. But I mean, others might see it differently to me. But I also had a question overall around the numbers that we put forward in the scenario, whatever scenario we choose, and I think on the balance, I'm probably in favour of scenario 3, given there's a focus on some of the better approaches around condition monitoring and such like, or further investment in that space. But if we give consideration, I've lost my train of thought.
Easy to do.
Yeah, that's what it was. If we put that plan forward and we have and then we're answerable to the Commerce Commission down the line, if through our condition assessment and such like, if that informs that a lower level of investment or a delayed level of investment in the capital works program is called for, or there's some sort of operational efficiency and such like, how does that interrelate with the expectations around our performance and our reporting to Commerce Commission?
So, so the water service delivery plan, while it's binding, ultimately will be replaced by a water services strategy that you'll have to produce. The first of those water services strategies, I believe, is due effectively for the year starting 1st of July 2027. So if you were, and it has that rolling 3-year review cycle. So while you're kind of bound to the decisions in this water services delivery plan, I think what we have to recognize is that ultimately the framework does know that the world changes. Just as we have with an LTP cycle, we have a review cycle of what our strategy is to invest in 3 waters. It's quite possible that there will be a please explain from Commerce Commission if you put forward a water services strategy or submit a water services strategy that sees a significant reduction in your investment between now and the 2027 plan. But I think as long as you're able to explain that and provide that detail, remembering that Commerce Commission will also have a pretty detailed information disclosure regime anyhow. They'll be asking for information about the condition of your assets and what information you have around the condition of your assets and various other elements around asset management, maturity and bits and pieces. They'll have enough information to also be able to understand whether you're bluffing them or not. So I think, if the investment were to drop because of all that work, I think, you should be able to explain that. And otherwise you shouldn't be reducing it in the first place. So I don't see that as being a significant issue. What I would say, and I think I've said this every time I talk about investment and future investment, is, historically, if we look at what investment is in council's LTPs every LTP after every LTP, it only ever goes up and up and up. So while, when you do your water services strategy, I would expect that your total investment needs might go up, but you might manage to find some savings somewhere because of the condition work. So I wouldn't bank on that 200 million being 200 million by the end of 2034. I suspect that's probably closer to 250 or 300 by the time you've actually spent it and worked through the increasing need as you get more information.
Thank you. And then just one follow up to that. When the so the numbers that were projected for just to know what we're comparing against here, if we're thinking back to the joint CCO option, and you put forward the scenarios 1, 2, and 3 at the start, which is the most relative comparative scenario in terms of what the output would have been?
Yeah, so that was so most of the joint CCO modelling was basically based on that capital program that is in scenario 1. So that additional 20 million of investment, that's not in the joint CCO modelling. I would say, yeah, that's the short answer for that one.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No, I think that's about it for that one,
Cool.
Stu.
Okay, I'm hanging around for the rest of the workshop anyhow, so if questions pop up later on, I'll still be here listening.
Yeah, well, it is that exciting. So you're welcome to stay on. We've got Alex has joined us now, so just hand over to you, Alex.
Yeah, I guess what we can do with, I don't know what was covered off at the start, and apologies for late arrival. Tim indicated a preference for, including the full investment that's illustrated in here. Yeah, we're looking to bring the Water Services Delivery Plan to next week's council. So again, an indication from you as to where you stand on this so that we can build that in. So I think, the option 1 in there are the recommended changes and additional investments that we think are needed in there to ensure that we're compliant. At this stage, the second lot increased investment scenario, which is listed as option 2, was about really around our renewals, which we think would be good to do, but obviously is imposing more additional cost within there. So getting a feeling from you so that we can feed that into the report that comes to council next week is important, really, in terms of what goes into our Water Services Delivery Plan.
So out of those 2 options, is it?
Yeah, so our recommendation is that you at least include the option 1. Otherwise, we think we won't be compliant. But it's your consideration of option 2. And this is this balance that Stu talked about between making sure that we've got sufficient programme, but not getting more and more unaffordable for our community. And making sure that we're in that sweet spot really of a sufficient programme, but not an unaffordable programme.
We haven't got the graphs or the table. Sorry, can you run through what the options?
Sure, you're able to put those up on the screen again, just so that we can see what they are.
Sorry, I'm on both mute and my camera's off, and I'm just scrambling. You would like the difference in those options. It's annoying I didn't put them on a single slide, which would have been and now I'm not sharing. Sorry, this is where technology fails me every time. If I go back to this and hopefully can go back through, I assume we're referring to,
I think slide
table
9
here.
was the first one.
So slide 9 has some, I think as you mentioned, Alex, has predominantly very compliance focused investment, additional investment beyond the base case. So some really critical stuff that has to happen in the drinking water supply upgrade space. When we were pulling this together, I haven't used these words in here, but these are what we'd call must-haves. So these are the things that we believe must be included to be able to ensure that we can demonstrate compliance in WSDP. Would you like me to move forward to the other slide, which shows the more
I think
options?
maybe let's pause there and just check whether there's any clarifications needed, or whether we're content with those. And just bear in mind, these are proposed budgets to be put in the Water Services Delivery Plan. All these would be subject to going through the the business case process and feasibility and what have you.
We'll go John and then Tim.
So I only have one question, I suppose, more than Josh. Are you suggesting there, Josh, that the Lower Waitaki scheme gets hooked up to Oamaru? Is that what that first one's saying?
Yes, I do believe that that is what that is stating, correct. At Lower Waitaki, we've got several issues. There's a UV issue where the UV is not essentially powerful enough to be able to meet the new standards. We've got a chlorine contact issue, and we've also got escalating nitrates within the groundwater. To resolve most of that, we're looking at connecting up to Oamaru rather than building another treatment plant at the site. Stuart, can you just clarify for me, some of those numbers they're an increase in some
They're
of
an
the
increase. Yeah, they're not that. So this is only the change. So most of these, well, many of these already have a budget. It's just that budget isn't sufficient, based on either your updated costings or the various conversations we've had with yourself and Paul Hayes. Many of these budgets are not sufficient to be, the existing budgets are not sufficient to deliver what we want. So universal water metering is a good example there, where there is 8 million already in there. It's just that based on that benchmarking unit per unit kind of analysis that you've presented in the past, Josh, that wouldn't cover all the connections in Waitaki.
Okay. Right, I think we're ready to go to the other additional ones.
So can we just take it that our recommendation to include those in, we'll put that in the report for next week?
I think so.
Yep, okay, just clarifying.
That one. Right, and then if I move to the other one, what we don't have here is any, I'll be clear, this is what we've called the should do's. There are a whole pile of projects that obviously were removed from your original capital program to get down to the 200 million. That's been covered many a time before. We have still been relatively, I guess, diligent in making sure that we're not putting everything back in here. So this is not the full wish list of Josh or the full wish list of Paul. This is the stuff that we really think we should do, but just didn't quite make the cut for the previous analysis. It's not the could do's or nice to haves.
Tim.
Would the justification for any of the additional project spend hinge on the outcome of the OPEX? Or are they kind of totally unrelated? Either a question for you, Stu, or the team here.
I think maybe the team might be able to answer that better. I mean, obviously, we talked about a little bit around like that condition assessment and understanding the useful lives of particularly of our cast iron pipes. That would obviously have an impact on the water renewals, but that's not an adjustment that we're making in this particular set of adjustments. The other stuff, yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I suspect probably most of the OPEX isn't going to drive the investment in the CapEx and of these changes.
And what about the water metering and the outcome of that? Would that?
Yeah, so the water metering, again, like maybe better for Josh to be able to answer that, but I would expect that the water metering, if you had it in before you did the condition assessment and the performance data of the water infrastructure might help inform that, might give you a bit more detail around that. But also, again, these changes don't have any changes. Water metering maybe might impact the resilience reservoir question. I think that might be something that Josh can respond to. In terms of the network extensions, they would still have to happen because the areas that just don't have pipes to them at the moment. But the water metering, I would imagine, actually, if anything, for the first few years after water metering, will probably increase your investment in the water network to be able to resolve the leaks that are now more easily identified. But longer term would ease that investment back.
Jeremy. You okay? You sure you're okay? Okay, radio. Thoughts on this one?
I'm supportive of that being added back in and with primary focus on the operational investment, but and I'm open to others' thoughts on the other aspects, but I'm hearing what's been put forward and to Stu's commentary just here. It sounds like there is a justification for that, some of that stuff to come back in. I think one point I didn't touch on before in and around the smoothing. I was just wondering what the impact of not smoothing out but smoothing forward the charges. So where that low period of rates rise was from 29 through to 33, if we increase in charging there to take the peak out in 36, 37, that could potentially decrease the charges on a household basis in the medium to longer term, which could help offset some of this increased investment.
I think that's probably a question for you all to consider. Like I say, I think for me, absolutely, I think forward loading those increases would take off some of the debt pressure and possibly also take off some of the price pressure eventually. The extent to which you want to do that, I guess, I would say the other thing to consider in that, I guess, is that also by doing that you're bringing it down to a more predictable continuous increase in charges rather than lumpy spikes or periods where we don't have an increase and maybe community gets used to not having big increases and then ends up with a big spike. I don't think that's an ideal outcome for homeowners either. So all things to think about.
Just my thoughts on that. It's possibly a topic that's best left to the council of the day to make a decision. The next council will be doing a long-term plan, and they'll be able to look at those years and decide what they want to do with them at that time. If we model it as smooth, then it won't have as much clarity about when is the investment happening versus when is the cost being incurred. So I don't think we need to do that for the purpose of the delivery plan. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one. I think the main thing is, what's it looking like for the rest of the current long-term plan, and then how the next council deals with the following long-term plan. They can make whatever adjustment they would want to.
Yeah, McKercher, I think you're right. I think absolutely those smoothing decisions, I mean, I guess they can be punted to another day in a way. One of the key things I think you got to remember as well is, I guess, we don't know if and when an economic regulator is going to come in and put price restrictions or guidance around how much prices can or cannot increase, or how bespoke those price increases may be, or indeed in the advent of a rates cap, what that might mean in terms of water services, whether it even applies to water activities or not. But I guess all of those things are also going to be at play in terms of making that decision around what you do with prices. Obviously, if you knew that a Commerce Commission was coming in and how they were going to apply revenue caps, etc., then you would be able to better predict whether you're going to need to increase prices over a consistent period of time to be able to ensure you've got the debt headroom. Because I guess the risk of not smoothing and relying on a 15% increase in charges in a particular year is the Commerce Commission says, no, you can't do that, and then you've got a debt issue. So but I think in the environment that we're in, where we don't know exactly what that looks like at this point, and the Commerce Commission have kind of said we'll only use those powers if and when we need to, I think probably it does make sense to be able to communicate the annual impacts rather than trying to bury them, I guess, in a smoothing scenario.
John?
Yeah, thank you again, Stu. Look, I'm quite impressed with that up there, even though I don't like that number at the bottom. I don't like any big numbers like that. They frighten me, but what it does do, it gives a positive outlook of proactive maintenance and somewhere to start. And, you know, all those 5 options up there, we might not need half that, but those 5 options actually give us an increased ability to identify the biggest problems we've got. And so that is somewhere where you start throwing your money rather than what we have already had. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think to our team, whether this is a second part of a decision, that's a recommendation that comes to us. So the first recommendation being the increased spend, and then this being a second recommendation as to an even further one. I would like a little bit of detail just to understand what the reservoirs, what areas are they going to be serving? Is that on, well, are they on rural schemes? Are they on urban schemes? Just is there a level of that, or is it just here's a general issue that here's some money to deal with it?
Yes, it's a general issue. So Taumata Arawai have come up with their compliance strategy. And essentially for the first 2 years, we're focusing on water, drinking water standard upgrades. And then they turn their attention to resilience of supplies. So that's essentially saying that irregardless of environmental factors that may occur, we can't issue boil water notices and we can't issue conserved water notices, etc. So you need to have resilient supplies, which generally means additional storage within the network so that you can turn off treatment plants when there's environmental issues rather than continuing to pump that water. Is $5 million going to cover it? I don't know. But it's a placeholder for us to do some work on sensitivity analysis on where we need additional storage and where we don't.
Yeah, I guess it makes a difference whether it's one of our separate rural schemes or whether it's an urban scheme or one of our urban connected rural schemes. So just as to the impact, but I think, yeah, if it comes forward as with whatever information there can be for any of those, it'd be good to understand what network extensions actually look like. Like is it just putting a main line into that area, and then if subdivision happens, then it's there, and making that land actually able to be used for more intensive residential or whatever. I guess it's probably not going to be for that meeting that we're going to actually have that, but I think policy would need to be developed as to how's that investment going to be happening, how's it going to be decided where to put that infrastructure, because otherwise you can spend a lot of money putting infrastructure in, and then it never gets used for 20 years, and it's been just a waste of money. So talking around in that circle, I think see what you can put in for that agenda, and some of it maybe just have to be a subsequent policy. Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Going to Mr. Palmley's question about what we would prefer, I would tend to fall in line with Councillor Blackler that we need to include everything possible, because at the end of the day, we know that DIA are going to stick it up us, and sending a half-baked or an optimised report for us is not going to cut the mustard. We need to actually be totally upfront with what we need to deliver for our community, and face the consequences.
Okay. I think the best way is to have it come as separate recommendations on the day, and we can make a decision on each one, and yeah, discuss the merits. That's okay. So certainly not leave them out. Okay, any other views or comments? Okay,
I'm looking at Amanda because I think we're on to credit rating.
We almost were. Tim.
Just those two line items around the operational spend, do they provide a good level of comfort around what we need to do to achieve what we need to achieve in that space? Or just so we're aware, is that a conservative number or a number that we're comfortable with, or what's the consensus around that?
Yep, so I said I'll talk to the water condition assessment first. The modelling that's been done is based on the assigned base lives in our asset management system. And the large part of the backlog in the water renewals in the early period is to do with the cast iron mains, 1880, 150-year base life, puts it 2030, and they're highly critical. So we should be working on those yesterday, theoretically. We're not actually seeing a lot of failures. So we've got evidence that they're not at the end of life. We've got evidence that we probably can, so we believe we can extend the life, but we don't have the evidence to support that. So the reason for sort of front loading some of that condition assessment is to get some scientific evidence that we can use to justify the decision not to start digging up the town to replace those pipes. Conversely, you've got other pipes, particularly in rural areas, which have a 100-year base life and are failing at 50, 60 years. So yeah, it goes and swings and roundabouts there.
So the budget that's been assigned is sufficient to do what you need to do?
The budget that's been assigned is to hit the cast iron mains in town and get some representative samples across town. That should give us the information we can use to justify a decision not to leap into a wholesale renewals program there.
Thank you.
John?
Yeah, I take that on board, but I struggle with using dates and timelines about the extended life of a product. And so from a practical point of view, when we did it, if that particular line started blowing up, then you replace the line. If you go in there 3 or 4 times to repair it, you don't need a test. You know that piece is shot. We have pipe work on the one I worked that they had a 20-year lifespan, and it's still as good as the day it was put in when you go to do it. So water never sleeps, and it's like rust. It'll find a hole, it'll find the weakest point and blow it out. And yeah, that's why I'm so impressed with where these changes are being made, because it's actually going to start identifying some of those problems.
And maybe just to comment to that, the renewals program that we have is based on modelling which needs the base life, and that gives us a budget for renewals per year. When we get to how do we spend that budget in any particular year, that's when we're looking at the condition, the failure rates, and targeting the highest failure rate pipes.
All right. Okay, 10 minutes for credit ratings. So Amanda.
Yeah, so we should have David Walker from BAM Corp online, and the slides are in your pack.
He is online.
Hi,
Welcome, David.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, good as gold.
Right. Hey, look, obviously got some reasonably tight timelines, so I'm just wondering whether I should just quickly run through it or go straight to questions.
I think if you, for the purpose of, I guess, the public aspect of this workshop, if you could just cover off the key points.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, look firstly, what is a credit rating? Now, a credit rating doesn't distinguish what's, a good entity, what's a bad entity. It basically looks at the credit quality, or it's a financial assessment of the entity's ability to repay interest and principal. So it's not a broad measure of what's good or bad, but it just looks purely at the credit quality. 2 main providers of credit ratings in New Zealand. One, firstly, is Standard & Poor's. The other is Fitch. Watercare actually did use Moody's, but that's the only exception to that. I think listening to the previous workshops and to the conversation here today, I think it's pretty well understood why a credit rating is required. It basically just allows you to get that high level of borrowing through the LGFA. And sorry. I think also too, you
Slides
probably
now.
see, sorry, Amanda, what was that?
Just sharing your slides now, so I'll try and keep up with you.
Oh, okay, rightio. So we'll just go to the next page if we could, Amanda. Okay, so obviously there's some other advantages of fact just being able to borrow more from the LGFA, but it kind of gives a measure of how well you as an organisation are performing, against yourself in terms of how the credit rating agencies measure your performance, but also too it sort of acts as a comparison point with perhaps your peers in the sector. It's not directly comparable to others in the sector, but I've basically provided examples of other entities with credit ratings later in the piece. Just moving to probably that last point, because I guess you're thinking about what sort of timeline would be required to put a credit rating in place, and that's anywhere between 60 and 90 days. There's been, as you're probably well aware, there's been a bit of a rush in recent times to put credit ratings in place. But in general terms, that 60 to 90 days still applies. So that's something to work on for your sort of timelines. Something I didn't put in the slides, but it's very interesting, the differences in approach between Fitch and Standard & Poor's. Standard & Poor's have a much more cautious outlook for the sector than Fitch. So that would be something that you would need to keep in mind in terms of who, if you did decide to get a credit rating, who you would go for. And on the next slide, Amanda, it talks about the costs associated with the credit ratings. Standard & Poor's slightly higher, 63 Aussie. And that's an annual charge as well, versus Fitch is 57,500. And that last section on that slide basically talks about, apart from the fact that it allows you to borrow more, it gives you a sort of a slight improvement in your borrowing rate for the LGFA as well. And in general terms, if you weren't doing this for the fact you needed to borrow more money, we've kind of quantified it on the basis of debt of 50 million, and over the medium to long term, getting a credit rating makes sense on a financial basis, just on the improved margin, but on a standalone basis. So Amanda, we'll jump through to the next page. Again, I thought you would find this interesting, particularly in southern waters. You can see, for example, some of the credit ratings that some of those entities have achieved quite recently as well. And if you look, if you're really interested, you can actually see that you're quite surprised at perhaps names you associate with very good credit ratings not getting quite as good as you would have thought. And part of that is down to some using the Standard & Poor's, others using Fitch. But again, happy to follow up one of those ratings in question time. So Amanda, we'll shoot across the next page. Again, this information has been provided by LGFA, which basically shows that the range of credit ratings for the local government sector in New Zealand, and it ranges from AA+ to single A. And we'll just shoot across the next page, please, Amanda. And again, sorry, this is what I was trying to put in perspective. These are a list of the major names in New Zealand that do have credit ratings. You might be surprised to see names like, for example, Contact Energy and Chorus that have a BBB type rating. And I should have backtracked a little bit, but the best quality rating you can have in New Zealand is best type of rating you can have, full stop, is a AAA rating, which both the New Zealand government have and LGFA have. And then you get down from the AAAs to the AAs to the single A's, and you go to the triple Bs, double Bs, and so forth, till you get down to the C and D type credit ratings. The way I kind of perceive the A type credit ratings is that you're still talking about degrees of excellence, still very, very good credit ratings from virtually any perspective. Sorry, Amanda, let's go to the next page. Now, also too, this was it's worth noting that when the credit ratings look at you from a ratings perspective, they don't just consider the financial metrics, but I'll talk about financial metrics first, because generally what they do is they look at the previous past 2 years. They look at on the basis of how you performed and have you done what you said you were going to do in terms of your forecast, And then in general, there's slight nuances between the two, but in general terms, they look 3 years forward in terms of your financial forecasts. But other aspects they look at is things like growth in your province or growth in your communities, population growth, connection, or in terms of waters, perhaps connections growth. They look at average incomes, they look at unemployment rate, they look at sort of GDP. So it's not just a pure financial metric, they look at other factors as well. And one of the biggest things that it really supports the very good credit raters in New Zealand is Fitch use something called the sovereign risk, and S&P use something called the institutional framework, and that looks at basically the quality of the income that you guys generate, which in terms of currently is rates, and they look at things like, for example, government type support or perceived government support. And Amanda will carry on. And I think we're up to the home straight now. So I suppose one of the questions you're thinking in your seats is, look, what would Waitaki get from it for a credit rating? And look, in short, and I don't mean to be flippant in terms of this, but look, it just depends on the numbers that you present. I would have thought, though, that on the basis that you get your water services delivery plan approved as being financially sustainable, then that gives you a long way to getting a good credit rating. Bigger picture, it's interesting that if you looked at water in its own right, without sort of council support, you're probably talking about a BBB type ratings. The covenants that basically LGFA are putting together, they sort of aim to get the water entities over the sort of medium term to a BBB type rating. And again, just going back to the point, what sort of credit rating you get, quite simply, just go back a wee bit, just to get the water services delivery plan signed off just means that you need to show that you're going to earn sufficient revenue in terms of water rates or rates in general, just to have the ability to support and meet those debt and interest rate obligations. Last point too is just this sort of broadening the topic out just a little bit, but this is a slide that LGFA released last week. And it looks to me that they're really tightening up the government's requirements for those local authorities that choose to do the in-house model. For that first point there's going to be a requirement for an independent chair, and also to potentially additional skills requirements. So they are really requiring sort of, I suppose, another set of eyes and a separate set of specialists as well. And that financial prudence point is another one as well. So again, LGFA are going to have a very close eye on, our council is going to be producing some form of balanced benchmarks. We know that the water service delivery plan is focused on ensuring that sufficient water revenue is earned to meet the requirements of the water quality requirements, and to make sure that the assets are maintained, and that CapEx, if CapEx is required, there's enough water revenue to meet that. But again, LGFA are going to look to make sure that there's kind of a ring fencing, if you like, of there's no subsidy from council to waters and back the other way as well. And that's probably it on that slide, Amanda.
Thanks, David. That actually use up all the time, but we'll stretch it out a little bit more just so we can get a few questions in, hopefully. So has anyone got some fairly sharp questions? Tim.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. It's interesting on the slide released by LGFA. LGFA look to ensure revenue is not transferred from non-water activities to make the service delivery plan look better. When you listen to the commentary earlier in the stages of water reform, it was about the issues being in reverse. But I just wanted to ask, last week at the workshop, there was comments made that from DIA that LGFA would be had indicated that they've been unlikely to give us a credit rating, and based off the information that's been provided today and your commentary, I'm just trying to reconcile that. Do you have any comment as to what you anticipate some of the challenges might be from a DIA perspective?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I was a little bit surprised at that, but I think their view maybe was based on their perhaps original numbers that you presented to them, but my last comments there were, look, at the end of the day, you need to have a plan that they will sign off and approve. And that plan is going to require a certain level of revenue to sustain and meet that. And if that's the case, as I made the point earlier, that gets you a long way to meeting the financial requirements to get a credit rating. So if you've got a financially sustainable water service delivery plan, assume based on the covenants that are currently out there from a LGFA point of view and in terms of DIA requirements, that would most likely, I can't say for certain, but that would most likely get you a pretty reasonable credit rating.
And I think that is consistent with what DIA was saying, because what they said is based on what they had from that very rough draft, it wouldn't get approved, and so we wouldn't get a credit rating. So I think it is consistent. Jeremy?
I'm gonna ask you a stupid question, but what would a sort of a commercial bank rather than LGFA look at these sort of severe borrowings? I know the interest rates and those things, but just a left field question over a longer term.
Sorry, are you talking about from a credit rating point of view, or just the ability to source funds?
Just to borrow from, or? Yeah, I guess using a bank rather than LGFA, full stop.
Well, I suggest you probably, a bank would basically probably take a harsher view on you, because LGFA borrowings are done like on a pool risk sort of basis rather than on an individual name basis. So my short answer to that was they'd probably take a harsher view, and most certainly the borrowing costs would be higher than otherwise, and significantly so.
And I think there were a few loans defaulted on 120 years ago. They won't forget that. So who was it? Oh, Simon.
Yeah, thank
Welcome.
you. Thank you. Dave, thanks for that. I've got just a really quick question. So it will probably cost the council about a couple of $100,000 a year to maintain a credit rating, with the cost of fixtures and then the cost of independent directors and just all the internal costs. You mentioned before that you'd probably get a BBB rating, BBB plus at best. What's the LGFA discount for BBB?
Oh, sorry, Simon, I just need to clarify that. So what I was saying is that you saw the range in sort of credit ratings that councils are currently getting, and that kind of stops at sort of the single A. There's a couple there that have single A rating. Okay. What I was trying to articulate is that if a water entity, what LGFA are trying to get to based on their covenant sort of settings is that if a water entity was looked at purely on a standalone sort of basis, the credit rating they'll get would be BBB. Now that they've got to basically sort of build to that over time. And I think eventually they kind of hope that the water entities will basically be able to stand on their own legs, but we're not. That's a medium or longer term aspiration. If that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess my question was more like you've presented to the PAR in the past around at what level of debt it becomes break even in terms of getting a credit rating, and at what level of debt it becomes positive, i.e. the cost of getting the credit rating is outweighed by the lower cost of borrowings. Do we still have that sensitivity analysis? Or is the primary purpose for getting a credit rating now to be able to increase the debt ceiling that one can borrow to?
Look, my understanding in terms of certainly from the water situation is just requirement to allow you to move the borrowing level from 175 to 280%. So the main driver is to be able to borrow more. But if you excluded that from the conversation, again, the rough rule of thumb would be around about 50 million to make it worthwhile.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay,
Just one more real quick.
I'm timing you.
You mentioned right back at the beginning about Fitch and S&P having difference. Just can't remember the precise wording you used, but basically appetite for risk, let's say. What is the basis of that, and has that always been consistent over time, or is that just current state?
That's a really good question. It goes back to sort of assessing risk is an art as much as a science. So there's qualitative and qualitative aspects, and this is just a personal view. But as I think Fitch haven't really changed the approach given the additional borrowing related to waters, where the Standard & Poor's are a bit more cautious on that. And as they there's a difference between Fitch and Standard & Poor's in terms of the institution background, uncertainty, implied government support. But there are qualitative aspects that are really hard to really pin down from a pure numerical point of view.
I think one indicator possibly of that is in March, Standard & Poor's cut the rates, the credit ratings for 18 councils.
That's right.
Whereas Fitch didn't. They maintained what they had.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much, David. Really appreciate your time and your quick explanation on the situation. Obviously something that helps inform us on where to from here on some of these issues. So thank you for that. Thanks, Amanda, for the coordination of all of that as well. Appreciate your work. Is there anything else that officers want to cover off? Yeah, I think that's enough. So we'll finish up for this session. So again, thanks to all the officers for being present and those who have contributed to this workshop. Really appreciate your time, and to members of the public in chamber and whoever watches this on once the recording is released. Thank you, John. You can switch it off. Right, thanks very much, everyone.